Now he and Rolando Cruz would get one last chance to prove their innocence. Rolando's third trial began on October 24th, 1995, where a lone public defender had originally defended Cruz. Some of Chicago's finest lawyers defended him for free the third time around: Thomas Breen, Matt Cannelli, and Larry Marshall. The defense attorneys made a key decision early on. They took Rolando's fate out of a jury's hands and requested Judge Ronald Mailing to rule on the case instead. On top of that, the evidence against Cruz was crumbling since his last trial in 1990. Dramatic advances had been made in DNA testing, and just weeks before trial, the premier expert in the country announced his findings.
It excluded conclusively Rolando Cruz, Alejandro Hernandez, and Stephen Buckley. And what this evidence showed, that there was only a 0.03% chance, a 3 in 10,000 chance, that what was found in Jeanine Nicarico had come from somebody other than Brian Dugan.
The DNA evidence forced prosecutors to concede that Brian Dugan was involved in Jeanine Nicarico's murder.
Time did in this case, were certain younger men who were amoral or immoral and willing to come to court and lie against somebody, were no longer willing to do that 8 years later, 10 years later.
There would be one more witness who would change his testimony. Sheriff's Lieutenant James Montezano had played a small but crucial role in the testimony of DuPage County Sheriff's detectives Dennis Kurzawa and Thomas Vosberg. The detectives claimed to have called Montezano at a suburban Chicago home for advice on the day of the infamous dream statement. During pretrial hearings, Montezano had corroborated the two detectives, but now he wanted to revise his story. And on November 3rd, the court recalled him as a witness.
Rolando and I were absolutely stunned. 12 years. And Rolando Cruz says, "Oh my God, someone's finally going to tell the truth."
I remember going back, sitting down. I remember writing a note to my mom. Testify.
Montezano said he had checked his credit card receipts. He now realized he had been in Florida on the day of the so-called dream statement. Contrary to his prior testimony, he had never spoken to the detectives.
He finally broke down and admitted that he lied.
Defense attorneys immediately requested the judge to throw out the case for lack of evidence. Judge Ronald Mailing took a 30-minute recess to consider. By the time he returned to the bench, court deputies had rolled out a security barrier, blocking off the spectator gallery. The judge held up Jeanine Nicarico's picture, calling her the most important person in the case. As the judge spoke, defense attorney Breen anticipated the ruling about to occur.
I turned to Rolando and I said, "We're going home." And his legs started shaking, and just up and down, up and down, up and down, and his body began to shake. He began to cry. You could tell it was finally sinking in, and he was saying, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, it finally.
Judge Mailing told the courtroom he could not recall a case in which more witnesses had changed their testimony. He called Lieutenant Montezano's admission that he had lied to the court unique in the annals of criminal justice. Then Mailing found Rolando Cruz not guilty. With the acquittals of Cruz and Hernandez came angry charges of official misconduct. One of the targets was the man who had overseen the Nicarico prosecutions, first as DuPage County State's Attorney, and then as Illinois Attorney General, Jim Ryan.
We relied on judges and juries and the Supreme Court to guide us in this case. We relied on the police investigation, and I relied on the experience of our prosecutors.
A year later, 3 of those prosecutors and 4 other DuPage County officials were indicted on charges they had lied and concealed evidence to convict Cruz, charges that could land them in prison.
There must always be a line between vigorous prosecution and official misconduct, between advocacy and unfairness, between justice and injustice. This indictment charges that line was crossed.
Among those accused of crossing that line were former prosecutors Thomas Knight, Patrick King Jr., and Robert Calander, as well as sheriff's officers Dennis Kurzawa, Thomas Vosberg, and James Montezano.
It took a lot more than 1 or 2 people to stop what I think was a truly evil prosecution from going forward. And I think there's a lesson in that about the way good triumphs over evil.
The fact that DNA evidence indicates Brian Dugan raped Jeanine Nicarico. State's attorneys have never charged Dugan with the crime. Their investigation remains open. Dugan is serving 2 life sentences at the Menard Correctional Facility. The man who spent a decade on death row for a crime Dugan confessed to has been adjusting to a life of freedom. Cruz was 19 years old when he entered prison, 32 years old when he got out. Days after his acquittal in early November 1995, Rolando Cruz went on a symbolic errand. Now that he was starting life over, he needed a copy of his birth certificate as identification. So Cruz and his attorney Tom Breen headed off to the Kane County Clerk's office to order the birth certificate. But after all his years in prison, Cruz had only one document with his name on it to prove who he really was. And the ultimate irony, it was his signed death warrant, stating that he was to be executed by lethal injection on the 12th of June, 1985. And indeed, Rolando Cruz was a man reborn, after an ordeal the likes of which American justice had never seen. For those who battled so long to free Cruz and Alex Hernandez, the lesson is not necessarily a popular one. While there are certainly cases of wealthy criminals who spend their money to beat the rap, it is often too easy to convict innocent but poor people of murder.